Okay, so as Emma said, propaganda is an agenda. It's a way of being able to disseminate information, ideas, even rumors, and they're deliberately spread to widely help or harm a person, a group, a movement, an institution, a nation, etc. Now, keep in mind, it can propaganda can help, but also propaganda can harm as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you sort of an overview of propaganda and how it's been used and where in different places that it's been used. So the first place we're going to go is hello. Okay, there we go. So this is a piece by an artist by the name of Elizitsky. It's Russian. And the name of this piece is Red Wedge Invades. And so, very clearly, it's almost very literal, where you see that the Reds are invading a community. The thing about propaganda that you should keep in mind is it's really based on the idea of being able to communicate to illiterate people who are illiterate about a subject or actually illiterate in general. During this time, there were in Russia there were many people that were not able to read, and therefore in ways to be able to get propaganda, we would have things like this that would show graphic elements that would imply certain things. In this case, a threat. Here's another Russian piece and what I like talking about with these pieces in particular, visually, is the use of the diagonal. This is very important, the diagonal in a composition, because what it does is it implies action, it implies movement. So in this case, we have a worker who is working very hard, and also at an opposite diagonal are the arms. So the idea here is the communication here is to be able to work but yet be armed. Um, we have two forms of posters here, and again, I like the idea of emphasizing that use of the diagonal. In this poster on the left-hand side, we see the use of repetition of hands, everything moving in the same direction. There's one big hand, and the implication here is that we are all unified in following one leader, and we're all moving towards one direction. The piece on the right-hand side, again, that use of the diagonal and the idea of a force, and that force is that we're moving, we're moving towards the left, or we're pushing forward, and we are going to defeat, and we are going to fight. Here we have an example, two different examples, one Russian, one American, and on the left-hand side, clearly we're shouting out, things of that need to be heard. People need to speak, and then after on the right-hand side, we have the clear example of shut your mouth. Do not say anything. And this period, this poster was done during a period during wartime in America, and it was always assumed that there were spies everywhere. So, we had to be, or we were told that we needed to be very careful with talking about anything related to things that we were doing. Maybe an uncle was in the military, or maybe we had an aunt that was working in a bomb factory. We did not want to share this information because it was implied, or the propaganda was that spies were everywhere and people were listening, and they were going to take the information that you were sharing to the enemy. So keep your mouth shut. This is a German piece. Again, the use of the hand, the use of the diagonal, the use of communicating, unification. Everybody is in agreement. Everybody is pointing up in the right direction. And then after the big words underneath, or the big word underneath, is "ya," which means yes. So it's a very powerful, very positive, very influential piece during the German War. Here are two examples of propaganda where, in propaganda, it is not uncommon where stereotyping is exaggerated and is used. On the left-hand side is a German poster, and the whole idea, and without even knowing, it's about Jewish people and the villainization of Jewish people. So what they've done is they've exaggerated the features of the Jewish people that are depicted in the poster, making them look somewhat devious, making their features of their face over exaggerated, making them not look very nice. Of course, using the Star of David in red, all as well as contrasting that with the green background, creating this very acidic, not very pleasing poster. This is a warning about Jewish people and whatever evils they are portrayed in this poster to have or be. On the right-hand side, we have an exaggeration of a Pacific, of an Asian, a Japanese soldier who is looking very, very devious, is over exaggerated with the mouth and with the teeth and the eyes and the glasses. And then if you'll notice that he's sort of embracing his hands, just daring you, go ahead, daring you to take the day off so that they could come and invade. Something that's very interesting, that I find interesting about this poster, is look who on the lower right-hand corner is the sponsor of this poster. Now, this poster would be considered totally inappropriate today for the stereotyping of it, as well as the use of the chopstick type font that's being used. But this was part of the propaganda to be able to let Americans know that, these Japanese are shifty and they want you to take the day off, and, they're going to dare you to take the day off so that they can take over and you can be very afraid. Here we have male and female version of propaganda of being able to support the war effort. During the 40s, was it the 40s? This is during the 50s. No, this would be, I'm not quite, I don't remember the date of the Rosie the Riveter, but this was during a time where most of our men were in combat, and we needed people to be able to be working in the factories, in airplane factories and military factories, and so women were recruited, and it was during this period that most women appropriately would be seen, or it would be expected for them to be homemakers, keepers of the home and watching the family, but their efforts were very much needed during the war. And so recruiting women to come to the factories and start working was a very, very important thing in terms of the war effort and being able to have women participate in the war effort. And so here we show strength of a woman who is obviously working in a factory and is being able to help out, and empowering women with the idea that they too can be part of the war effort and they too have the ability, who can do it. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, we have these very overgeneralized muscle men that are, shirts off, looking very heroic and being able to fight the effort of the war effort and to get them, to recruit them to join the military service. I brought this in, I made this last night, and I think it's really important. I'm actually fascinated by this slogan, and typically I would ask, and I want all of you to kind of think about the meaning, what you think the meaning of this is. First of all, it says, "Make America Great Again." So, what it's saying, or the way I could read it, is that America is not really great right now. And because of the word again. And so, when we're referring to making America great again, what time period do you think we're talking about, or they're talking about, or it's talking about? There typically are two different answers that would be used to answer my question. One would be possibly the era, what's called the Reagan era. You know, nowadays a lot of people, or many people in politics, use Ronald Reagan as sort of the model time, or model period of when we were really great and being able to do great things. And so it wouldn't be unusual to hear a politician say, what we need to do is we need to get back to the Reagan years, and to be able to have those policies. Another answer could potentially be in what I'm going to present in the following. My take on it is it's not about Ronald Reagan. As a matter of fact, my understanding, my personal take on it is that it has more to do with this time period. This is an artist by the name of Norman Rockwell. And Norman Rockwell was an American illustrator that illustrated for a magazine, which name you'll be seeing a little. Oh, Saturday Evening Post. And the thing about Norman Rockwell was that what he did was he painted images, or illustrated images, of a very, very innocent Americana. In his America, everything was great. It was during this period around the 50s where everybody went, came home for Sunday dinner. And there was always food on the table. And, here we have the patriarch in a suit, the matriarch in an apron. She's just made this incredible meal. You'll see that everybody around the table is absolutely happy. There is absolutely no negativity in this. This time is innocent. This time is rich. This time is great. In reality, in the 50s, the 50s was actually a time where we had the lowest unemployment ever in the history of our country. The majority of the country of our country was employed. People had money in the bank. People were able to save money. So overall, it was kind of seen as a very, very good, very wholesome time. So much that, again, here's the more illustrations by the illustrator. And you'll see that in his Americana, we have the innocence of life. We have dad who goes to the barber and gets his hair cut weekly. We've got the boys in the middle playing baseball and, apple pie. And then on the left-hand side, mom helping her son, who's the football player. And everything, again, is incredibly wholesome. What bothers me about this time, you'll see, is that everybody is also incredibly white. Can you imagine looking at this dinner table and actually having to talk about issues that we're dealing with today? Issues related to meth, drug abuse, alcoholism, abortion, pregnancy, teen pregnancy, venereal disease. I mean, I could go on. And it's not that these things did not exist during this time. They were just pretty much I don't want to say whitewashed, but they were pretty much glossed over by this propaganda that all life was incredibly good and innocent. The next image is actually same illustrator, but it talks about the other side of America. And this is a portrait that Norman Rockwell did, which actually hung, I believe, is still hanging in the White House. And the little girl's name is Ruby. I forget her last name. She's still alive. And during this time, this the Rockwellian, wholesome time, was a very volatile period for African Americans, or it was a period that is referred to as Jim Crow. It was a period where black people were segregated, and this painting is really about this little girl, Ruby, who actually is a true story, had to be escorted by federal agents because she was allowed to attend an all-white school. And you'll notice the writing on the back of the wall. You'll notice the tomato splotch on the wall, and just the innocence of this young lady and the bravery that she has to be able to go to this, sort of identifies the other side of what was going on in America. What's really interesting about Rockwell was that he really did want to do more work like this, because he did realize that his paintings were really implying that everything was great in our country, in our world, and he recognized that things really were not great. But unfortunately, the publishers would not publish work like this. They wanted to push the idea of wholesomeness and just everything being great. And the truth is that everything was not great during this time. Here we're dealing with the propaganda recruitment of boys. On the left-hand side is a recruitment poster to get young boys to join the Jugend, which are having to have children participate in the German War, and then after, on the right-hand side, we have this sort of propaganda posters to get boys to join the Boy Scouts. And I don't know if you're all aware of this, but the Boy Scouts no longer exist. They're no longer a functioning body, and one of the reasons why they're no longer in practice is because they actually ended up going bankrupt from a great deal of many lawsuits they had regarding many of the boys being molested by scoutmasters, and so they were inundated with a lot of court hearings, or sort of court battles, and so went bankrupt with it. But the Boy Scouts don't exist. Ultimately, what both posters, or all three posters, have in common is the loyalty of truth, honor, and country. So I find that really interesting as a juxtapositioning of the two different sets. Here we have propaganda posters that were done for military men to warn them about venereal diseases, and from the hot mold that's being poured out of the steel bucket here to imply the kind of pain that you're going to go through. The depiction of three women as a loaded gun, and then after the sailor that's not on the ship because he missed the boat because he had VD. So propaganda, and now what we're doing is we're looking at propaganda in leaders. Starting at the upper left-hand corner, we have Lenin. In the middle, we have top Che Guevara from Cuba. We have Chairman Mao from China. From the lower right, we have Obama, and then after, there is a depiction of, and I had mentioned him early, Ronald Reagan, who I will begin to talk about in just a little bit. And what you're going to hear about Reagan from me is a story that is unlike what you're going to hear from politicians that are running for office today. Earlier I said most politicians will say we need to get back to the Reagan, the Reagan era, the Reagan Reagan politics, and in just a little bit, I'll share with you what Reagan politics on the other side look like. In all cases, you'll notice that color is very important and then after the sort of the gaze or the look and the positioning of where each politician is looking. For the most part, everybody's looking to the future. If you look at Obama, he's looking beyond you, and he's looking. The whole idea is to be able to present that idea of hope. Same with Che Guevara. He's looking beyond you and looking above you to be able to see what's beyond the future. And with Reagan, he's, well, we'll get to that a little bit. Let me go to the next. Go back. Okay. So, this is this is from the early 80s. And I want to share something with you that in the early 80s, I lived in New York City, and I arrived there in 1980. And it's ironic, well, not ironic, it was unfortunate that I actually arrived in New York City at the birth of AIDS. As a matter of fact, New York City was considered one of 3 areas that was considered ground zero for HIV and AIDS. And it was during the 80s, the early 80s, that it turned out that there was this unknown disease that people were just dying from, and they did not know what the cause was. It was unknown. Before it was called AIDS, it had other acronyms. It was called GRID, G-R-I-D, for gay-related immune disease. And then it had another word, I forget. But one of the things that they discovered early was that AIDS was killing a certain faction of people. It was killing homosexuals, HIV drug users, in particular needles, people that were sharing needles, Haitians, and black people. And during this time, it really wasn't much of a threat. And to be blunt, it wasn't much of a threat because the people that I just described were not necessarily people that mattered socially. They were social outcasts, social pariahs. They were not necessarily people that the overall everyday citizen would really care about. So many people during this time who didn't face a threat of getting AIDS were really not very moved by this threat of AIDS. As a matter of fact, it was common for somebody to say, well, what do I care? I'm never going to get it, and maybe this whole thing of AIDS is God's way of saying you shouldn't be doing what you should be doing. So, there was a real stigma related to this. And it was really hard to be able to get somebody to talk about AIDS, to be able to get help with AIDS. As a matter of fact, if you had AIDS and lived in New York City, you probably would not be able to go let me rephrase that. If you did have AIDS in New York City, you were more likely to be turned away by a hospital. Doctors would not see you. People would not feed you. You would not be welcome in restaurants because nobody really understood how you got it. They were seen as a sort of a walking pariah, and so if you were diagnosed with it, you pretty much died on your own. As a matter of fact, there were many situations where people with AIDS who had AIDS actually got kicked out of their apartments or homes. They were homeless. They had nowhere to go. If you happened to be living in your own apartment or dwelling and you died, there were many cases where people, the ambulance companies, even mortuaries were refusing to take corpses or pick up people because, again, of the unknown. So there was an underground group called Grand Fury. And this was a group of people that decided they needed to do something about the issue of AIDS and people dying and needing things to be done. So this is a very famous poster, one of the most effective posters they did, and basically what it is propaganda. And these posters were actually posted everywhere in public around New York City and other big cities. And the message was is that if you remained silent about AIDS, that you were clearly going to die, and people were going to die around you. And if you didn't have AIDS and you were silent about it, people were going to die. The use of the triangle is actually historic because during the Nazi war, homosexuals were placed in concentration camps and were given pink triangles to wear on their clothing. And the difference is what the Grand Fury, the designers that did this poster, was they adopted that pink triangle, and typically it would be pointing down, but in this case, they decided to point up for positivity. But they did adopt what was, used as a stigma symbol for people that were homosexual during the German War, and using it almost as a badge of honor to be able to symbolize death and the fight for AIDS. These are more propaganda posters that were done by the group Grand Fury. During this time, Reagan was president of the United States, and one of the things that he was most targeted for and also known for was his silence on not dealing with anything related to AIDS or research for AIDS. He was one of the people that just really could have made a difference in terms of being able to help with combating AIDS and being able to apply money towards research. But he did not, nor his administration felt that it was imperative, or it would be cost worthy to be able to investigate this, since people who were considered outcasts were dying from it and nobody else were. A good case to compare this to is COVID. All of you remember when COVID first came out, and you'll notice that it actually got a great deal of attention because a lot of people, were dying from it, but it did not single out outcasts. It actually dealt a lot. COVID was much more diplomatic in who it attacked, and therefore, government dollars were immediately placed to be able to combat it, as well as different types of protocols that were necessary, like mask wearing and things like that. So the government was much, much more proactive with COVID than they ever were. I'd say it took them about 10 years to actually begin to do something, or to even recognize that AIDS was an issue. This is another piece by Grand Fury dealing with women and women's issues in particular, and this can be applied today towards abortion. The problem of abortion, and men, the idea of men or women having to have the authority to be able to tell a woman what she can or cannot do with her body. So this is a poster that was done by Grand Fury. This is another very successful poster that they did, because AIDS really was attacking more men than it was women. The focus was primarily on men, but women were catching AIDS, and they were catching AIDS from men. And so there was a campaign to be able to incorporate women into the campaign, to let them know that they, can be very much affected by AIDS, as well as men as well. The idea of needing money for AIDS research was very important. This is now we're getting into the idea of love. And this is again another Grand Fury poster, the top one. And the whole point of the campaign is based on the idea that kissing will not kill you, or you don't get AIDS from kissing, that it was okay to kiss. So there was this huge campaign of getting all these different types of people to kiss and to be able to show that it was okay to do that, and that it can be acceptable to be able, that we shouldn't be afraid to have that sort of closeness with other people, regardless of the threat of AIDS and HIV. That actually campaign got picked up by a very expensive sweater company called United Colors of Benetton. And it was all about the idea of loving your enemies and loving the opposites. And what they did was they did this campaign of, finding least likely people that would be kissing and embracing them and having them kiss, or having them embrace and kiss, to be able to show this campaign of unhate. This is my favorite one. I like that one. United Colors of Benetton, if you're not familiar with them, earlier I said they are a really, really expensive sweater company. I believe they are from England, but to buy one of their sweaters is just, it would take an entire paycheck of mine to be able to do it. But one of the things that they decided to do during the 80s was to take on social problems and to make statements out of them, all while selling their product. And so you'll see the scale of their posters with the one on the right hand side of this lady with her child, but you'll see that there's a billboard behind her. So what United Colors of Benetton did was they dealt with issues related to AIDS, starvation, HIV, and low birth mortalities. Next is AHA. Okay, so now we're going to jump into Calvin Klein. Many of you would know him as the clothing designer. And I think it was in the 90s, this campaign came out, and Calvin Klein, believe it or not, created this propaganda campaign that glorified and made heroin, like what you shoot up with, heroin, and it was called heroin chic. And it was actually a fashion term that Vogue magazine and Madison Avenue and the Fashion District coined as being a selling propaganda, and it was called heroin chic. This is a model by the name of Kate Moss, and you'll see that she's very, very thin, very emaciated, not terribly glamorous. But she kind of was the debut of what heroin chic was about. And the next pages I'm going to show you actually came out of Vogue magazine. So this is all about the heroin chic campaign. The idea was to glorify drug taking, glorify overdose, living in, squalor, going out to clubs all night and driving out all night and being stoned all night, and just, but wearing your Calvin Kleins makes you very, very chic and very up to date, I don't know, fashionable. Next one. Go back. Sorry. Okay, so here's more of the heroin chic, where again you're kind of haggard, you're emaciated, you really don't eat much. You wake up at 3 in the afternoon because you've been out all night, but still you're able to wear your fancy, fashion clothes, and the image on the lower right-hand corner are a couple of glamorous models doing lines of a slip. And so the propaganda here is that it's cool to do drugs and to be drugged out. So the last image I have is another fashion image from fashion. This is Ralph Lauren, and he is the one that produced, the Cologne Polo, which is a wonderful product. I really like how it smells. But when he launched this ad campaign, the propaganda here was that if you buy anything Ralph Lauren, you're just going to be part of the jet setting crew. You're going to be part of the going to the polo matches, and you're going to wear fabulous clothes, and you're just going to look absolutely beautiful. And the one thing about his campaigns during this time was that, like Norman Rockwell, they were all white. A lot of white, all white people. It was a lot of fun, or not really a lot of fun, but it was interesting to be able to take Ralph Lauren ads from the 80s and 90s and play the game Where's Waldo or Where is the Black Guy. He got so much flack for it that he eventually introduced a black model by the name of Tyson, who debuted in his ad campaigns and clothing campaigns. But, for the most part, it was all about this idea of promoting a very rich, very white, very affluent culture if you buy the product. Okay, so let me close that. And 1 second.